What's up guys, Kyle here again, and today we're gonna check out the Diezel Herbert Mark III. Let's do it! Alright guys, hope you're doing great out there today. If this is your first time here at my channel, my name is Kyle, and what I do is I take awesome high gain amplifiers, overdrives, guitars, cabs, speakers, pickups, I record them with a simple SM57 setup, and I give you guys the unprocessed audio on your end. So if you're into East End or thrash riffs, drop C hardcore riffs, and dudes who have been dreaming about milkshakes all day, you're in the right place. Consider hitting the like button and subscribing on your way out so you don't miss any more of my stuff. Thanks! Alright guys, it is finally time to jump into the Diezel Herbert Mark III. And many people who have been following my channel for a while know that I have had this amp in my possession for some time, and I actually did a live stream with this amp about 2 months ago where I put it up against the Angle Savage 120 Mark II, and everybody thought that the Angle sounded incredible, and everybody thought that the Diezel sounded terrible, myself included. For some reason, when I had it hooked up in that live stream, it sounded really sludgy, really thick, really undefined, and just really bad. And I'll put a link to that stream if you guys want to hear what I'm talking about. But I own a Herbert Mark I, and the Herbert Mark I is one of my favorite modern high gain amplifiers, even for thrash metal. I think it excels at those tones, even though everybody seems to think that it's this big kind of sludgy rock and roll and more modern metal amp in the sense that it's more like a Bogner Uberschall or a Mesa Dual Rectifier where it's got a big low and low mid emphasis, but it can pull off a lot more than just that. So when I got this Mark III in and I used it for that live stream, I was really disappointed in what was coming out of the speakers. I did not think it sounded good at all, and even though I was making it very clear to the viewers that like I love my Diezel Herbert Mark I, I'm very intimately familiar with how to dial that amp in, I got a lot of angry comments telling me everything that I was doing wrong with the amp and why it didn't sound good. One of the main comments was that I was using a Mesa 412 cab. Everybody was saying that the Mesa 412 cab does not fit well with Diezel amplifiers. I don't agree with that statement whatsoever, but just to show you guys that I'm gonna be a little bit open-minded and I'm going to listen to some of your comments, I went through my cabinet collection, which is over 40 cabs, and I picked out the cab that I really felt accentuated this amp best. I didn't try 40 different cabs, but really I went through my collection and I know how all of my cabs sound, and I really felt that this here Randall 412 XL cab was going to be one of the best cabs for this Diezel amplifier. This is a standard size 4x12 cab. It is rear loaded. It is 16 ohm with V30s in it. But this cabinet has a center partition in it, which essentially completely separates the top speakers from the bottom speakers, thus giving you a very tight and fast low-end response because there is less internal volume, and all of the frequencies from both sets of speakers are not bouncing around all inside the cabinet. So a cab like this that tightens up the low end of usually, you know, loose and big and boomy sounding amps, I figured was gonna be perfect for the Herbert. Now on top of that, I also went through a bunch of my guitars. I auditioned like 7 or 8 different guitars through this amp to try and see which guitar that I felt sounded the best through this amp, so that you guys know that I am doing my utmost to get the absolute best out of this amp that I can, because a lot of people seemed upset that I didn't like it off the bat. So just to show you guys that I'm doing everything I can to make this amp sound as good as I can for the style that I like to play in my videos, I am letting you in on everything that I did to select the gear to pair with this amp to get the best out of it for this review. So keep that in mind. I did play it briefly with the Mesa cabinet, and I thought it sounded just fine with the Mesa cab. I don't agree with the statements that this amp does not sound good with Mesa cabs, but just letting you know why I picked the Randall 412 over the Mesa for this video. So with all that being said, we have a lot of ground to cover. I'm gonna jump into it. For that intro track and for most of this video, we are going to be using my Gibson 2016 Les Paul Traditional, and I have a Seymour Duncan full shred in the bridge of this guitar. I also had the Electric Eye Mud Killer on in front of the plus mode on channel 2 with the mid cut on, and I'll explain why as we get later into the video. But this Electric Eye Mud Killer has a really hard switch to push by hand, but it accentuates the Herbert really well because it boosts mids in more of a round way than something like a TS9 or an SD1, and it really adds a lot of mid content where the Herbert tends to be lacking a little bit. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go over to the minus mode. I'm gonna put the gain down to 9 o'clock. I'm going to put all of the EQ controls at noon, and we're gonna start exploring some of the tones on this amp. I'm gonna turn the mid cut off. We're gonna put that presence back up to noon, and we're gonna put the depth at noon. So yeah, no boosts on the boost board and guitar straight into the amp. This is what we have. So right off the bat, not very much gain at all. It is a little bit kind of lacking in the mids for the classic rock type stuff. Let's go ahead and boost that gain up a little bit to get a little bit more saturation. We're about 11 o'clock. Okay, so if you guys have ever played a Diezel VH4, this mode reminds me a lot of channel 3 on the VH4. It is kind of stiff, it is not compressed whatsoever. The gain has a very kind of crunchy gain structure to it versus the saturated, compressed, and almost digital sounding Diezel gain structure that you'll find on something like the Einstein or the other channels of this Herbert. I don't mean digital in a bad way. There is a very signature gain structure to Diezel's really high gain amps, such as the Herbert, the Einstein, the Lil Fokker. Those are the ones that I've played anyways, other than the VH4, where they almost have like this very super harmonic that top end that almost sounds digital, but on the minus mode, it more or less reflects that crunchier style, stiff, less compressed VH4 type gain structure. What I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of mids, and by a little bit, I mean bump them up pretty good, and see if we can kind of bring this channel to life for a little bit more of the classic rock stuff. Overall, it doesn't sound bad, but again, it's a very, very modern amp, so it doesn't sound quite right for that stuff. You can certainly get away with it if you're just playing to a bar crowd who's not gonna know the difference, but if you're looking for straight up, you know, plexi type tones, you're not really gonna get it from this. It's gonna be more in that VH4 realm. So we removed a little bit of presence to kind of smooth the amp out a little bit. Let's add a little bit of treble, a little bit more mids, and let's bump that gain up to 3 o'clock and see if we can get some saturation out of this mode. All right, so the amp has filled out significantly now. I'm gonna back that bass down because we have a huge and pretty tubby low end going on at the moment. I'm gonna back it down even more, and we are going to actually bump the deep up to kind of compensate for the bass being removed from the EQ control. And there we go. That sounds, again, it sounds very modern and it sounds good, but it's just not like a super convincing classic rock type tone. All right, so what happens if we engage something like an SD1? Let's see how much we're able to tighten up this channel, saturate it, and see if we can kind of get it into the more modern levels of gain. The SD1 works really, really well with the Herbert. So you can go ahead and complain about $50 pedals in front of $4,000 amps all you want. I personally don't give a shit. I think it sounds incredible. I'm gonna push that gain even more. We're gonna bump that low end back up just a tad. To me, that sounds really, really good, guys. Like, I have no complaints about that tone. Maybe a tad dry. Gain is pushed all the way. That sounds excellent. Man, I'm super happy with that. I'm gonna bump the mid cut on just to show you what a difference it has on the tone. I have it set up in a certain way. There's kind of a trick to using the mid cut to actually bring out a little bit more upper mid in the signal. You turn the intensity all the way down so that the intensity controls the shape of the mid cut, and the more you dial it up, the more it's gonna carve out the mids overall. And then the level actually is like a level in, I believe it's in front of the amp, because when you turn it up, it almost turns up like your input volume. So you'll get a little bit more saturation and a little bit more volume out of it overall. And it's just, when you have the intensity dialed all the way down and the level dialed up, it almost acts as like another like upper mid boost. So here's how that sounds. Here it is with the mid cut off. And one more time with it on. Now it is making the signal slightly louder, but yeah, that is a trick. I use that pretty much regardless of if I'm on channel 2 or channel 3 for the types of tones that I like. It really tightens up the amp, makes it more percussive, and just kind of tunes it to my ear a little bit better, gives it a little bit more of that upper mid aggression. So let's shut that off. We're gonna go over to the plus mode. I'm gonna turn that gain back down to 9 o'clock. We're gonna put everything back to noon. We're gonna turn our boost off, and we're gonna explore channel 2 a little bit. All right, so everything's at noon. All of our boosts are off, and here we go. One thing I will say is this amp sounds really good with everything at noon, and that's usually a good sign, knowing that you don't have to stray too far from putting everything at noon to find a good tone in this amp. But let's go ahead, let's push that gain up, because we are here for the belligerent amateur riffs and not the dad rock. All right, so we are already quite a bit saturated, but I want even more. I want to push that to 1 o'clock. I want to get into more modern levels of saturation. And the bass, the low end is a little bit sloppy, so what I'm gonna do, and the presence on this amp is definitely more aggressive than it is on my Mark I. We're gonna dial that presence back just a bit. We're gonna dial that bass back. We're gonna dial the mids up and see if we can't get a little bit more of a percussive sound out of this. All right, so let's get a little bit of treble in to make up for that presence being pulled back a tad. All right, so that sounds definitely better to me without a boost than say something like a dual rectifier. You can absolutely get tight percussive palm mutes out of this amplifier. I actually think that this is a better amplifier for thrash metal than something like, say, the Mesa dual rectifier or the Bogner Uberschall. A lot of people will tell you that this amp can't do thrash. They are wrong. This amp can absolutely do ultra tight, punishing, chugging palm mutes. You just have to know how to set it up, and you have to pair the right stuff with it. So I really love this amp, if you guys can't tell. Let's go ahead and boost that gain even more. Woo, you can hear the noise coming through the speakers now, so we know that we got some saturation going. Pushing the gain that high thickens the amp up significantly. Now, if you're buying this amp for something a little bit more doomy and sludgy, you can absolutely pull those mids back and push the bass up. And it'll give you that sound all day long too. One thing I really do like about the Herbert, I'm not a lead player, but when you play single note stuff, especially higher up on the fretboard, those notes sound incredibly full. Like, I've never heard an amp where the notes sound as full bodied on the higher registers as I have with this. It almost sounds like you're on the neck pickup, but you're not. Now, even when you're dialed in for a tighter, more percussive type of rhythm tone, that body is still kind of there on those notes. So that is a really cool feature if you're a lead player. This is a fantastic amp for leads, especially when you get over to channel 3 and you've got some serious compression and saturation going on. But we are gonna go ahead, I'm gonna kick on that Boss SD1 again, I'm gonna touch nothing. Here's what it sounds like once it's being boosted. It immediately tightens everything back up. I'm gonna push that bass back up, I'm gonna pull those highs back. And you really have to push the mids on this to get a mid-forward type sound, and it's never gonna be as mid-forward as, say, like something like a Marshall or even a 5150 where the mids are just kind of in your face, but it definitely can get to the point where it takes its place in the mix without sounding like a mess. And I think with the mids up around 3 o'clock here, it does just that. Palm mutes are tight and percussive, but still full-bodied. We've got plenty of top end and upper mid aggression going on. That is a great thrash tone if I have ever heard one. We can actually probably pull that gain back a little bit and maybe get a little bit more threshold on our gate here so we're not picking up the screech of this pickup cover. That sounds so good, guys, seriously. Oh boy! All right, we're running out of time. That sounds incredible. I hope that you guys think the same. That is a really good thrash tone, extremely percussive and tight. We're gonna go over to channel 3, I think. Maybe not. What the hell's going on here? There we go. All right, channel 3, and we're gonna get that gain at 9 o'clock. We are gonna turn the MXR off, and I'm gonna put the presence and depth back. All right, so we are brighter, we are tighter, we are definitely more saturated, and we are just overall more modern sounding. There is a little bit more mid presence on this channel. Again, let's turn that presence back just a little bit. We are going to push the mids up and the treble just a tad, and let's get that gain up just over noon. Still a decent amount of clarity. We have a lot of low mids going. Let's pull that bass back a little bit. That is incredibly tight for no boost out front, guys. That is a super tight tone. Let's get a little bit more depth on the power amp. Percussive, that is a great thrash tone all day. Guys, the amp seriously sounds really, really good. Channel 3 with no boost, I could get away with playing that live for thrash with this cab and this guitar all day long. It sounds really, really good. We're gonna push that gain just a little bit more. So when that gain is pushed up a little bit, that is where those low mids start to fill out. Let's see what happens when we bump our mid cut in. I'm gonna turn the volume down just a tad. All right, a little bit boxy in the low mids for my taste, but it does sound good. I'm gonna turn that mid cut off. We're gonna turn the SD1 back on. Ridiculous. I play in a thrash band. That is a tone that I would use all day long. Just to show that, here's one of our riffs. I'm really digging this amp. Let's try it with an EMG real quick just to see how it responds to an active pickup. We'll do a quick drop tuned riff. This video is gonna be a little longer, but there's a lot going on this amp, so I just really wanted to try to do my best to showcase everything. Okay guys, Solar E 2.6 with an EMG 85 in the bridge. I have touched nothing on the amp. But that sounds brutal to me. That sounds really good, actually. I'm gonna get a little bit more bass. We're gonna pull that gain back a tad, and we're gonna pull that treble back a tad. That sounds good to me. One last thing, we'll go down to a drop C, play a hardcore riff. This thing is gonna excel at that tuning. I already know that it does because I've used it for that as well. Let's check it out. right, guys, that is gonna do it for me. This is gonna be a really long video, but I hope that it was helpful. I hope that you feel that this time around I did the amp justice. Honestly, I'm in love with this thing. I think it can do anything from that kind of signature VH4 Diezel hard rock sound all the way up to super compressed, super modern, high gain metal and rock, and it can also do the thrash thing all day long. It just really depends on the way that you dial the amp, but it is capable of so much if you really figure out how to dial it in and what gear to pair it with. So what did you guys think on your end? What type of tones did you think that I got? Do you think that I did the amp justice? Have you played this amp or do you own it? And if so, what are your thoughts on it? Let me know down in the comments and I will be sure to meet you guys down there to talk about it. If you liked the video, do me a favor, hit the like button on the way out. Consider subscribing because there will be plenty more of awesome amp demos where this came from. I'm pretty sure all my cameras have died but two. So last but not least, if you want to support my channel, down in the description of this video are all my support links, including my Sweetwater affiliate link, or you can consider becoming a member of my Patreon community like these fine people here and supporting the channel that way. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Kyle here again. We'll see you next time.